This story is about Damon Knight, a self-made millionaire with charm, confidence, and a penchant for taking outrageous bets. His friends, equally wealthy and competitive, joked about Damon's inability to resist a challenge. One of them, a sly smirk on his face, leaned forward and said, "How about this, Damon? Marry someone completely unfit for your status, someone society would never expect, and prove you can turn anything into a masterpiece." The group laughed, but Damon, always the risk-taker, smirked. "What's in it for me?" he asked, swirling his expensive scotch. "Your pride, Damon," his friend quipped, "and $50,000. Damon's eyes gleamed with amusement. A bet this bold would not only entertain his friends, but also allow him to prove, once again, that he was untouchable. But who would this unsuitable bride be? And why did he feel a pang of hesitation even as he agreed? Clara Winters sat on the cold pavement, her thin coat doing little to shield her from the biting autumn air. Once a bright, ambitious young woman with dreams of making a difference in the world, Clara had always been the kind of person who lit up any room she entered. But life had not been kind to her. Now, with weary eyes and calloused hands, she watched the world rush past her, her dignity reduced to clutching a tin cup and hoping for a few coins. What no one knew as they hurried by was that Clara was about to be recognized by someone from her past, Damon Knight, a man whose life couldn't have been more different from hers. Years ago, Clara and Damon had attended the same high school. Clara had been a star student, always at the top of her class, while Damon, though intelligent, had been more focused on charm and ambition. They had shared classes, conversations, and a mutual respect for each other's drive, though their paths never truly intertwined. Damon, now a self-made millionaire with a penchant for making bold, extravagant bets, hadn't thought about Clara in years. But as he stepped out of his luxury car that evening, his sharp eyes landed on the figure sitting on the street corner, and recognition struck him like a bolt of lightning. Was it really Clara? He hesitated, adjusting his tailored suit as he studied her face more closely. Though her features were worn with hardship, there was no mistaking the woman. He had once admired for her determination and kindness. How had she ended up here begging on the street? Damon's mind raced as he approached her, torn between curiosity, guilt, and an idea that was already forming, a reckless, audacious bet that would soon intertwine their lives in ways neither could predict. As Damon approached Clara, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement, she glanced up, startled by the imposing figure before her. For a moment, her tired eyes met his, and he saw the flicker of recognition in her gaze. Clara quickly looked away, ashamed of her disheveled appearance. "Can I help you?" she asked softly, her voice hesitant but steady, betraying the resilience that still lingered beneath the surface. Damon hesitated, his usual confidence wavering. "Clara, it's me, Damon Knight. We went to high school together," he said, his tone gentler than usual. Clara froze, her hands gripping the edges of the thin blanket draped over her lap. "Damon?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Memories of their school days rushed back. Days when she had dreams as big as the sky and a spark that couldn't be dimmed. Damon cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "I didn't expect to see you like this," he said honestly, though he instantly regretted the bluntness of his words. Clara's expression hardened, a shield against the pity she could already sense. "Life doesn't always go as planned," she replied quietly, her voice tinged with bitterness. For a moment, the two were silent, the bustling city around them a stark contrast to the quiet intensity of their conversation. Then Damon spoke again, his voice carrying a mix of curiosity and an audacious idea. "Clara, I have a proposal," he began. Clara raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "What kind of proposal?" she asked, her tone cautious. Damon's lips curled into a faint smirk, his mind already working out the details. "It might sound crazy, but hear me out. I want you to marry me." The words hung in the air, absurd and impossible. Clara stared at him, stunned. "Marry you?" she repeated, her disbelief evident. "Why on earth would you ask me that?" Damon leaned forward slightly, his expression serious now. "I have my reasons, and I'll explain. But for now, I'll say this. I can help you, Clara. You and I both know life hasn't been fair to you. Let me give you a chance to start over." Clara's heart raced as she processed his words. She wasn't naive. She knew there had to be more to this sudden offer than charity. "What's the catch?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. Damon hesitated, then admitted, "There's something in it for me, too. But you'll be taken care of completely. You'll have a home, security, and a fresh start. All I ask is that you trust me." Clara's mind spun with questions. What did he really want? Could she trust him? Desperation battled with suspicion as she glanced at her meager belongings and thought about the night spent shivering in the cold. Finally, she looked back at Damon, her voice trembling. "Why me?" she asked. Damon's reply was simple yet enigmatic. "Because I believe there's more to you than the world sees right now, and I want to prove it." Clara sat in silence, the weight of Damon's proposal settling over her like a heavy fog. She looked down at her hands, rough and cracked from years of struggle, and then at the small box of belongings. By her side, a meager representation of everything she had left in the world. The ache of hunger and cold that she had fought so hard to shield them from. What choice did she really have? Damon stood before her, polished and composed, offering what seemed like an impossible lifeline. But could she trust him? "Why would you want to marry someone like me?" she finally asked, her voice raw. The vulnerability in her tone surprised even herself. Damon's expression softened for a moment, and he crouched down to meet her eye level. "Because," he began, his voice measured, "I see something in you, Clara. Something that the world doesn't anymore. You're strong, resilient, and capable of so much more than this." He gestured at the street around them, where pedestrians rushed by without so much as a glance in their direction. "I can help you start over, give you the resources to rebuild your life. All I ask is that you trust me, even if it's just for a little while." Clara's instincts screamed at her to be cautious. Life had taught her that nothing came without a cost, especially from someone like Damon, whose wealth and privilege shielded him from the harsh realities she faced daily. "And what's in it for you?" she pressed, her tone sharper now. Damon hesitated, then shrugged slightly, his expression a mix of amusement and sincerity. "Let's just say, I'm curious to see how far we can take this. Maybe it starts as a deal, but who knows where it'll lead." The ambiguity of his answer unsettled her, but there was a glimmer of truth in his eyes that she couldn't ignore. Clara's heart wavered between fear and the faintest flicker of hope. What if this was her chance to escape the endless cycle of hardship? What if Damon, despite his motives, was genuinely offering her a way out? She exhaled shakily, the sound almost lost in the hum of the city around them. "And if I say yes?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Damon stood, his confident demeanor returning. "Then you'll have everything you need. A roof over your head, security, and a fresh start. I'll make sure of it." Clara looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of deception. She saw ambition, certainly, but also something else, perhaps a flicker of compassion. Taking a deep breath, she nodded slowly. "All right," she said, the words heavy with uncertainty. "I'll do it." Damon smiled faintly, extending a hand to her. "You won't regret this, Clara," he said, his tone firm. As she took his hand, a mix of fear and determination coursed through her. This decision might have been born of desperation, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope that it could lead to something more. The day of the wedding dawned clear but cold, with the pale light of the morning sun barely cutting through the crisp autumn air. Clara stood in a small room at the back of the venue, staring at her reflection in an ornate full-length mirror. The simple white dress Damon had chosen for her fit perfectly, though its elegance felt foreign against her worn and calloused hands. Her hair, once unkempt and lifeless, had been styled neatly by a professional, a luxury she hadn't experienced in years. Yet despite the transformation, Clara felt like an imposter in her own skin. The face looking back at her seemed like a stranger's, a version of herself she didn't quite recognize. Outside, the guests began to arrive, their laughter and conversation filtering faintly through the walls. Damon's friends, wealthy, polished, and radiating confidence, filled the opulent hall with their designer attire and perfectly rehearsed smiles. They whispered among themselves, amused and curious about the spectacle of Damon marrying a woman so far removed from their world. To them, this was little more than a game, a bold move by a man known for his audacity. But to Clara, it was a day that teetered between humiliation and an uncertain hope. When the time came, Clara took a deep breath and stepped into the aisle, her heart pounding in her chest. The guests turned to look at her, their expressions a mix of surprise and condescension. She could feel their stares as sharp as daggers, dissecting her appearance, and silently questioning what Damon could possibly see in her. Her hands trembled as she gripped the small bouquet of flowers, her knuckles white against the delicate stems. Damon stood at the end of the aisle, his tailored suit as sharp as his piercing gaze. His expression was unreadable, though his posture exuded the confidence that had always defined him. As Clara walked closer, she searched his face for any sign of mockery or regret, but found none. Instead, there was something she hadn't expected: calmness. Perhaps even reassurance. It was enough to steady her nerves, if only slightly. When she reached him, Damon extended his hand. Clara hesitated for a fraction of a second before placing hers in his, the warmth of his touch grounding her. The officiant began to speak, but Clara barely registered the words, her mind too consumed with the reality of what was happening. She was marrying a man she barely understood, in front of people who thought she didn't belong, and yet there was a spark of defiance in her heart. If this was her chance to rewrite her story, she would face it head-on. As they exchanged vows, Damon's voice was steady and composed, while Clara's trembled with vulnerability. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the room erupted in polite applause, though the undertones of skepticism were palpable. Damon leaned in and whispered, "You did great," before leading her down the aisle. Clara, clutching his arm, felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. The bet might have brought them together, but as they walked into the uncertain future, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The days following the wedding were a whirlwind of change for Clara. Damon's world was one of elegance and excess, a stark contrast to the harsh realities she had faced for years. His penthouse apartment, perched high above the bustling city, felt more like a dream than a home. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered sweeping views of the skyline, while the sleek modern furnishings seemed almost too perfect to touch. Clara found herself treading carefully, as though one wrong step might shatter the fragile illusion of her new reality. The first morning, she awoke to the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting from the kitchen. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The plush bedding and soft sunlight filtering through the curtains felt foreign, a far cry from the cold streets she had called home. As she stepped into the living area, she found Damon casually scrolling through his phone, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. He glanced up as she entered, his expression neutral but observant. "Morning," he said, gesturing to a pot of coffee on the marble countertop. "Help yourself." Clara hesitated, unsure of her place in this pristine space. "Thanks," she murmured, pouring herself a cup and wrapping her hands around the warm mug. The silence between them was awkward, but not hostile. Damon seemed content to let her acclimate at her own pace, though she could feel his eyes on her, studying her every move. As the days passed, Clara tried to navigate her new role as Damon's wife. The title felt strange on her tongue, especially since their marriage lacked the usual foundation of love and trust. Damon treated her with a polite detachment, offering her every comfort money could buy but keeping an emotional distance. Clara wasn't sure what to make of it. Was this all just part of a bet? Or was there more to Damon than his polished exterior suggested? One afternoon, as Clara explored the penthouse, she stumbled upon a room filled with books and framed photographs. She paused in front of one photo, a younger Damon, smiling alongside an older man who she assumed was his father. The warmth in his expression was a stark contrast to the guarded demeanor he now carried. For the first time, Clara wondered what had shaped him into the man he was today. Meanwhile, Damon found himself increasingly curious about Clara. She wasn't what he had expected. Instead of indulging in the luxuries he provided, she seemed more focused on finding her footing, quietly observing the world around her with a sharpness he couldn't ignore. One evening, he caught her flipping through one of his business books, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You're full of surprises, Clara," he remarked, leaning against the doorway. She looked up, startled, and then shrugged. "I just want to understand how your world works," she admitted. Damon smiled faintly, intrigued. "Maybe you'll teach me a thing or two about yours," he said, walking away. For the first time, Clara wondered if there was more to their arrangement than she had initially believed. Perhaps buried beneath the surface there was a chance for something real. As Clara settled into her new life, Damon began to notice things about her that he hadn't expected. At first she had seemed reserved, almost timid, as though she didn't want to take up space in his meticulously curated world. But as the days turned into weeks, Clara's quiet resilience began to shine through. She wasn't the fragile, helpless woman he had imagined when he made the bet. Instead, she was intelligent, resourceful, and unexpectedly determined. One evening, Damon hosted a dinner party for his colleagues in the sprawling penthouse dining room. The table was set with crystal glasses and fine china, the ambiance perfectly polished to impress. Clara, initially nervous about the idea of mingling with Damon's elite friends, decided to observe from the sidelines her plain dress and understated demeanor, contrasting with the glitz and glamour of the other guests. Damon had reassured her that she didn't need to interact. Much her presence alone would suffice. However, as the evening progressed, Clara found herself drawn into a conversation about business strategies. One of Damon's colleagues had been discussing a stagnant project, lamenting the lack of fresh ideas. Clara, who had been listening quietly, hesitated for a moment before speaking up. "Have you considered involving the employees in the brainstorming process?" she asked, her voice steady but measured. "Sometimes the best ideas come from those working closest to the problem." The room fell silent for a moment, the guests exchanging surprised glances. The colleague, intrigued, turned to her. "That's an interesting perspective. Do you have experience in this field?" Clara flushed slightly but held her ground. "Not directly," she admitted. "But I've learned that people often have untapped potential. Giving them a voice can make all the difference." Damon, watching from across the table, felt a flicker of something unfamiliar: pride. He had expected Clara to shrink under the weight of his world, but instead, she was quietly commanding attention. His colleagues seemed genuinely impressed, engaging her in further conversation as the evening went on. Later that night, as the guests left and the penthouse fell silent, Damon approached Clara in the dimly lit kitchen. She was tidying up, her hands moving methodically as she replayed the evening in her mind. "You surprised me tonight," he said, leaning casually against the counter. "In a good way?" Clara glanced up, her expression cautious. "I just said what I thought," she replied simply. "It's not a big deal." "It is," Damon insisted, his tone softer than usual. "You don't give yourself enough credit." For the first time, Clara saw a glimpse of vulnerability in Damon's eyes, a crack in the polished facade he usually wore. In that moment, something shifted between them. Clara wasn't just a bet anymore. She was a person Damon couldn't ignore, someone who challenged his perception of the world. And for Clara, the realization that her voice carried weight in his world was the first spark of a confidence she had long forgotten. The night Damon finally confessed the truth about the bet was one Clara would never forget. They were sitting on the penthouse balcony, the city lights stretching out below them like a sea of stars. The air was cool, and Clara wrapped a blanket around her shoulders as she stared out into the night. Damon sat beside her, his usually composed demeanor replaced by a rare tension. For weeks, he had been grappling with guilt, the weight of his initial intentions eating away at him. Now, he knew it was time to tell Clara everything. "There's something I need to say," Damon began, his voice unusually hesitant. Clara turned to him, her brow furrowing at his serious tone. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. Damon exhaled, running a hand through his neatly styled hair. "When I asked you to marry me," he said slowly, It wasn't entirely selfless. It started as a bet. My friends dared me to do it, to marry someone they considered unfit for my status." Clara's heart sank. The words hit her like a punch to the gut, and for a moment she couldn't speak. The blanket slipped from her shoulders as she sat frozen, trying to process what she had just heard. "A bet?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "You married me for a bet?" Damon nodded, his jaw tightening. "Yes," he admitted, his voice filled with regret. "But it's not what it seems anymore, Clara. At first I thought it was just a game, something to prove to my friends. But then I got to know you, and everything changed." Clara stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Her hands trembled as she faced him, her eyes filled with hurt and disbelief. "Do you have any idea what that feels like?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "To know that my entire life, this entire arrangement was just some twisted joke to you?" Damon rose to his feet, his expression pained. "I know I've hurt you," he said, his voice low. "And I can't take that back. But Clara, I swear it's not about the bet anymore. You've shown me a world I didn't understand, a strength I didn't know existed. You've changed me." Clara turned away, tears streaming down her face. She felt humiliated, betrayed, and yet deep down, she could see the sincerity in his words. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Because you deserve the truth," Damon said simply. "And because I care about you, more than I ever thought possible." For a long moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the city below. Clara's mind raced, torn between anger and the faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, Damon was telling the truth. Finally, she turned to him, her voice steadier than before. "You've got a lot to prove," she said quietly. "But I'll give you one chance, just one." Damon nodded, relief washing over him. "I won't waste it," he promised. For the first time, their relationship felt real, raw, and painfully honest, a turning point neither of them could have anticipated. The days that followed Damon's confession were filled with tension, but also possibility. Clara, still reeling from the revelation, kept her guard up, uncertain if she could fully trust him again. Damon, determined to prove that he had changed, began making efforts that surprised even himself. For the first time in years, he let down his walls, showing Clara parts of himself he had hidden from everyone else. One evening, Damon approached Clara as she sat in the living room, sketching designs on a notepad she had found in the study. The sight of her absorbed in her work stirred something in him, admiration, respect, and a desire to be better for her. "What are you working on?" he asked, sitting across from her. Clara hesitated before handing him the notepad, her sketches filled with intricate patterns and bold ideas. "Just some designs," she said simply. "I used to dream of making things like this, but life—" Well, it didn't work out. Damon studied her sketches carefully, genuinely impressed. "These are incredible," he said, his tone sincere. "Have you ever thought about pursuing this again? Turning these into something real?" Clara gave a soft, bitter laugh. "I wouldn't know where to start. People like me don't get those kinds of chances." "Then let me help you," Damon said, meeting her gaze. "You have the talent, Clara. You just need the right opportunities. I can connect you with people who can make this happen." Clara's first instinct was to push back, to insist she could handle things on her own. But the truth was, she had spent so many years surviving that she had forgotten how to dream. Slowly she nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice tinged with cautious hope. "But I don't want any shortcuts. If I'm going to do this, I want to earn it." Damon smiled, appreciating her resolve. "That's fair," he said, "and I'll be here to support you every step of the way." As weeks turned into months, Clara began to find her footing in this new chapter of her life. With Damon's connections, she met designers and artisans who encouraged her work, helping her refine her sketches and bring them to life. Her first collection, a series of handcrafted jewelry inspired by her own journey, gained unexpected attention. Damon, though proud of her success, stayed in the background, letting Clara take the spotlight. Their relationship began to shift as well. Damon's gestures of kindness became genuine, free of the arrogance that had once defined him. He listened when Clara spoke, valuing her insights and respecting her boundaries. For Clara, trust didn't come easily. But with each small act of sincerity, Damon began to prove that he was more than the man who had made a cruel bet. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker like stars, Clara turned to Damon. "I'm not the same person I was when you found me," she said quietly. Damon looked at her, his expression soft. "Neither am I," he replied. For the first time, their relationship felt like a partnership, built on mutual respect, understanding, and the slow, steady rebuilding of trust. As Clara's confidence grew, so did her bond with Damon. The walls that had once stood between them began to crumble, replaced by something unexpected, an authentic connection. Clara's jewelry designs were gaining traction, And with Damon's help, she launched her first small collection. To her surprise, the pieces sold out within weeks. The unique blend of elegance and raw emotion in her work resonating with buyers. Each sale felt like a step toward reclaiming the life she had once dreamed of. And every milestone was celebrated quietly in the penthouse, just the two of them. Damon, who had once approached life with bravado and selfish ambition, found himself in awe of Clara's resilience. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, transforming her pain into beauty. One afternoon, as they reviewed plans for an upcoming showcase, Damon couldn't help but smile. "Do you realize how far you've come?" he asked, his voice warm. "From sitting on that street corner to this, you've built something incredible." Clara looked up from her sketches, a shy smile playing on her lips. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted, though her tone carried a hint of pride. "But I've learned one thing. You can't let where you've been define where you're going." Damon nodded, his respect for her deepening with every word. "That's a lesson I think I needed too," he said quietly. For him, helping Clara wasn't just about making amends. It was about discovering a purpose beyond wealth and status. Watching her succeed had become a source of fulfillment he hadn't known he needed. Their partnership extended beyond business. Damon began including Clara in his world, introducing her to friends and colleagues not as a trophy wife, but as an equal. Clara, who had once been wary of his social circle, surprised herself by holding her own at events. Her genuine nature and sharp mind earned her admiration, even from those who had initially doubted her. One evening, after a successful event where Clara's collection was showcased, they returned to the penthouse, the air between them light and full of possibility. Damon poured 2 glasses of wine, handing one to Clara as they settled on the couch. "You were amazing tonight," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "Here's to your success and to proving everyone wrong." Clara clinked her glass against his, her eyes shining. "Here's to second chances," she replied, her voice steady. "And to finding out who we really are." The moment was quiet but profound. They weren't the same people they had been when this all began. Damon was no longer the arrogant millionaire who saw life as a game, and Clara was no longer the defeated woman on the street corner. Together, they had found strength in each other, forging a partnership that felt real and enduring. For the first time, their journey no longer felt like a gamble, it felt like a beginning. Months turned into a year, and the life Clara and Damon had built together was almost unrecognizable from where they had started. Clara's jewelry line had grown into a thriving business, with her pieces featured in high-end boutiques and worn by people who admired not just their beauty, but the story behind them. Each design carried a part of her journey, a reminder of her resilience, strength, and the transformation that had brought her to this moment. The penthouse, once a cold and impersonal space, had become a true home. Framed photographs adorned the walls, snapshots of moments that mattered. Clara's first showcase? Quiet evenings spent on the balcony, and even candid images of Damon laughing in a way that felt completely unguarded. The couple had moved past the bet that had brought them together, replacing it with trust, understanding, and something neither of them had dared to name at first: love. On a sunny afternoon, Damon surprised Clara with a visit to a new location, a modest storefront, nestled in a bustling neighborhood. As they stood outside, Damon handed her a set of keys. "What's this?" Clara asked, her eyes widening in surprise. "Your own studio," Damon said with a smile. "A place where you can design, create, and build something entirely your own." Clara stared at him, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Damon, I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "You've earned this, Clara, every bit of it." Inside, the space was bright and open, with sunlight streaming through large windows. Clara could already envision the workbenches, the displays, and the people she could hire to help her grow her business further. For the first time, the future felt limitless. That evening, as they sat together on the couch, the city lights twinkling outside, Clara turned to Damon, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever regret the bet?" she asked quietly. Damon shook his head, his gaze meeting hers. "No," he said firmly. "Because it led me to you. It made me realize what really matters in life. And if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change a thing." Clara smiled, her heart full. You've changed. Damon, so have I. And maybe that's the best part of all. This, that we found each other and became better because of it. Damon took her hand in his touch warm and steady. Here's to us, he said, his voice soft but filled with conviction. And to whatever comes next. As they sat together, the world outside continued to move. But for Clara and Damon, it felt as though time stood still. Their story, born from a reckless gamble, had become one of transformation, redemption, and a love they had never expected. It was a reminder that even the most unlikely beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings, a new chapter filled with hope, promise, and endless possibilities. Clara and Damon's story became more than just a tale of redemption. It became a testament to the power of transformation and the beauty of second chances. What began as a reckless bet had turned into something neither of them could have foreseen, a life of shared purpose, trust, and love. Clara, once a woman forgotten by the world, now stood tall as a successful entrepreneur, her jewelry celebrated for its authenticity and soul. Damon, once driven by arrogance and games, had found meaning in humility and generosity. Together they were no longer defined by the circumstances that brought them together, but by the bond they had built through honesty and growth. On the anniversary of their wedding, Damon surprised Clara with a quiet celebration in the studio. She had turned into her creative haven. The space was alive with color, filled with sketches, materials, and the buzz of new ideas. This isn't just your studio, Clara, Damon said, handing her a small, beautifully wrapped box. It's where you prove to yourself and the world what you're capable of. Clara opened the box to find a necklace, one she had designed early in her journey. Damon had it crafted as a symbol of how far she had come. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at him, overwhelmed by the gesture. You believed in me even when I didn't, she whispered. Thank you for showing me what I was worth. And thank you, Damon replied, his voice soft, for teaching me what it means to care for someone, not for what they can give, but for who they are. As they stood together, the weight of their journey settled between them, not as a burden, but as a foundation for the life they had built. Their story, born from a bet, had transformed into a powerful reminder that the most unexpected paths could lead to extraordinary places. And there you have it, a story of transformation, love, and redemption that began with a reckless gamble. Who could have guessed that a bet would lead to something so profound? It just goes to show that life's most meaningful connections often come from the least expected places. What would you have done if you were in Clara's shoes or Damon's? Let this story inspire you to see the potential in every moment, and to believe that even the hardest journeys can lead to beautiful destinations. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales like this one. Remember, every ending is just the beginning of a new chapter. Until next time, stay hopeful, stay kind, and always believe in the power of change.